It is my pleasure to present to you the first proposal of today in our final proposal presentation, which is Longorami, presented by Joe Lyding. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so here's our poster. Okay, so the idea was to combine atomically precise lithography with DNA origami. There's a number of things that people are already starting to do with DNA origami, but they suffer from the size of the origami, the precision of its location, long-range order. Nevertheless, certain small circuits, mechanical manipulators, enzymatic cascades, and molecular, these are all possible things that could get better if we can figure out a way of combining things in useful ways. So this is the vision slide that was up earlier. So why is this the most promising route towards integration? Well, what we want to do is minimize the atomic precision patterning so that it's technologically feasible. So we'll get mega amplification, because if we're using 2 atoms of patterning to give us 1 million atoms worth of positioning, that's a pretty good amplification. So we'll see how that's going to happen. What problem are we solving? The large-scale technological atomically precise fabrication. And focus on real-world applications. We've named a number of things that could potentially be made by integrating DNA origami in this with an AP platform, tunable plasmonics, photonic circuitry, etc. And we think it's potentially fundable by a lot of the major agencies. And the tech transfer opportunities are good because this is potentially a low-cost approach. And the large-term payoff is that we're creating an atomically precise programmable platform that could accelerate research and development. So what we want to do is combine the top-down from the bottom and the bottom-up. Instead of standard lithographic approach, we're going to use atomically precise approach. And what we want to do is eliminate sort of the randomness that comes out of the DNA origami. Even though the small-scale assembly, self-assembly is very good, you can see that there are other issues. We want to solve that problem. So I'm not going to go through all this, but what we want to do is, for the atomically precise part, is use a scan probe approach. There's a number of issues here that needs to be addressed that we are already addressing. But if we take, for example, a silicon surface that's been passivated in ultra-high vacuum, and then we come in with an STM tip, we can actually remove hydrogen, as illustrated here, and create these templates. And we found that we can deposit molecules on these templates selectively, like norbornene and diene in this case. But what we want to do is move this to the atomic scale. And this technique is amenable to that. So for example, here's a single hydrogen atom that's been removed from silicon. And then we found, in fact, when Mark Herson was doing his PhD, he was doing this and showing that you could tether single molecules to substrates like this, where you make a pattern of dangling bonds, and then you attach molecules like the allocynes in this particular case. So what we plan on doing is making a template where we have registration marks, illustrated by these triangles, where these would just be fiducials that would be patterned and then passivated with neutral molecules. And then we would come in with molecules that we would do 2 patterning runs, pattern all these sites for molecule A, dose with molecule A, pattern all the sites for molecule B, dose with molecule B, and then we would have attachment. You know, the attachments would be something like norbornene and diene with different functionalizations on the ends. And then when we take this out of UHV, we can actually attach the DNA linkers for the DNA origami to that. And what we'd end up with is something like this, where we take this out of UHV, now we can put it in a solution, and then the DNA origami would self-assemble onto that. So these squares represent the DNA origami. And furthermore, if we want, they can be linked together. So we could have a very tightly stitched DNA origami structure. And this is an example structure that's amenable to this. It's already being made by people in our group. And here's an example, and here's the AFM image of this particular origami on a surface. So this is one where we could functionalize it and link it together as well. Here's an example of how you might functionalize. So you'd link to the surface with groups like X and Y that would bond to these AB structures, and then you'd have these linkers on top that you could add additional functionalization to. And there's an example of that. And that gives us back to this picture where now we can now start making these types of things and then expanding to larger structures and see where we go from there. So some of the next steps are, there's a lot, we can start building a library of the types of DNA origami structures we could make with this. We could test the various functionalities, staple these things together. Right now, the scan probe microscope has access to maybe 10 by 10 microns. That could be stepped over larger areas, or you could use multiple arrays of STMs MEMS-based STMs. There might be different modalities. You could have single molecules like A and B, or you could have lines of more weakly bonded structures. You could integrate metal wires into the substrate if you wanted to apply electric fields and biasing to the structures that you make. And you could extend this to other systems like molecular Legos. And of course, eventually you have to package this thing in a commercial, something compatible with commercial technology. So that's where we're at. Thank you.
Any questions from the judges?
This is going to be room temperature?
This is all room temperature. The entire process is room temperature.
Okay, nothing.
Can you go back and forth between your patterning and then the solution and putting certain DNA origamis on, and then go back in and depassivate other areas?
No.
How about proofreading?
Proofreading. Well, we can proofread with the STM while we're in vacuum. But if you put molecule A down, there are no dangling bonds on the surface. So if you were to dose that surface with molecule B, it would stick to nothing. So then you'd go in and now pattern sites for the molecule B absorption, and then dose with molecule B, and it would only stick to those locations, even though the molecule A is already down there. So when you do pull it out of vacuum, you've got the A's and the B's there, or C's and D's, because we also talked about you might have two different types of origami that you want to stitch together in some unique pattern. So you'd have A and B for origami 1, C and D for origami 2. So you do A, B, C, and D all in UHV, all in sequential, all with atomic precision.
I had mine in the origami step, whether there's any proofreading, but it goes in right side.
Well,
so it's based on a
Microphone.
yeah. The origami binding is based on cooperative interaction with DNA strands, because we put unique DNA strands for A and B, and only when the origami binds to both of them, because we do assembly at the temperature just a little bit above the melting point of a single strand.
So it's not exactly room temperature, it's whatever temperature only.
Yeah. But it's
both
below,
sides survive.
definitely below 55. We continue with DNA length.
All right, thank you. And that was that one. Okay, and now we're moving. Let's give them another round of applause.